Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Public Sector Catering Future of the Service webinar with Kath Dalmeny, Chief Executive of Sustain. We'll just wait a few minutes as people log in. Joining Kath today, we have Andy Jones, Chair of the PSC 100 Group, and Bethan Williams, Foodservice and Procurement Advisor from NFU, who will be helping to answer your questions. We've still got a few people logging in, so we'll give it another couple of minutes before we start. A minute or so. If you've got questions for the panel today, please use the Q&A facility. If you just want to exchange views and ideas with people, then please use the chat function. It makes it easier for David to manage the questions as they come in. So I'm going to pass over to David now, who will introduce you to today's webinar.
Right, good morning. I'm David Fode, editor of Public Sector Catering magazine, and thank you for joining us for our latest Future of Your Service webinar. Today we're going to be exploring why public sector catering has been taken for granted for so long. We're going to be looking at how the pandemic lockdowns have highlighted the importance of the sector and how different parts of it can better collaborate to influence government policy on issues like obesity, healthy eating, food and nutrition, and procurement. Because all of these issues, the public sector is uniquely well placed to play an important role in. It's just that government doesn't seem to recognise the significance of the work done feeding everyone from young children in schools through to patients, through to the elderly in care settings. And it has to be said that the people who carry out this important task haven't traditionally done very well in shouting about what they do. Now, someone who feels quite strongly about this and who has some thoughts about what can be done to remedy the situation is Kath Dalmeny, Chief Executive of Sustain, the Alliance for Better Food and Farming, and we're lucky enough to be joined by her today to hear what she has to say. Good morning, Kath.
Hello, it's really nice to see you, David.
Excellent. We'll hear more from Kath in just a moment, but before we do, I'd like to welcome the other people who will be involved in today's webinar. We have Bethan Williams, who is the Foodservice and Procurement Advisor with the National Farmers Union. Good morning, Bethan.
Good morning, David.
Did you just tell us a little bit more about your role, Bethan?
Yeah, of course. So I work for the National Farmers Union, in which most of the people will know who we are. We represent 55,000 members across England and Wales. My role sits within our HQ team, our food chain team, and I work on all things food service and public procurement. So it's my job to champion the work of our farmers, the work of our members, and British food and drink within the food service and public procurement space. So yeah, great to be here. Thank you very much for having us.
Right, you're very welcome. And we're also joined by Andy Jones, Chair of the PSC 100 Group. In that role, he aims to bring the different parts of the public sector together on common issues. Hello, Andy.
Good morning, David. Good morning, everybody. I'm looking forward to another great webinar this morning.
Great, right. Well, a quick reminder about how the webinar will work. Other than the panelists and me, everyone will be muted. If you want to get in touch during the webinar, you can put a question to the panelists using the Q&A function. Please include your name and your company if you can, and keep it to questions rather than comments or statements. And you don't have to wait until we start taking questions. You can post one at any time. The other way we'd welcome you to be involved is to share a comment with everyone using the chat function, and remember to choose the option to all panelists and attendees, and then we can all get to see that. Right, let's move on to Kath now. Kath Dalmeny's background is as a food campaigner and consultant with a special interest in food sustainability and climate change. Over the last few years, she has led Sustain's response to Brexit with its implications for healthy and sustainable food and farming and fishing. And she's also helped to develop the campaign for Better Food Britain. Over the last year, she has served on national and local liaison and coordination groups to support the pandemic emergency food response. In 2005, she won the BBC Radio 4 Food and Farming Awards Judges Special Award. In 2018, she was identified as one of the 10 most influential campaigners by The Right Ethos. And she is, I'm very glad to say, currently one of Public Sector Catering magazine's top 20 most influential people.
Oh,
Right.
I sound very grown up, don't I?
Right, Kath, after that build up, let's get on with the questions. Maybe it'd be helpful to everyone just to sort of, if you told us briefly about the work of Sustain and the common interest with public sector catering.
Oh yeah, and there's huge common interest. I come personally from a background in catering in the adult education sector and care passionately about the role that food plays in people's lives in institutional settings. We had big budgets where I worked for food, and food was valued because it was a college for sustainability, so people understood that food was a big part of the whole message and the whole way of living. So whenever I'm around public sector caterers who have denuded budgets and are managing, you know, on such pittances and then getting their budgets cut all the time, I am so sympathetic, because I really passionately care about the quality of food in public sector institutions, and it's always more than a meal. So I'd like to talk about that a bit in a minute. But so to tell you what Sustain is an alliance of about 100 national organisations who are all interested in the healthiness and sustainability of food. We work right through the supply chain, from the farming end, right through the environmental issues that are associated with that, and then into how the food reaches the market in a fair way that will help farmers to make a good living, but also turn into good food that supports health, whether that's in public sector institutions, or it might be the quality of the food in manufacturing or whatever, and then also the way that food is valued or wasted. And I've personally sat on quite a lot of public sector committees over the years. I've been on a Tory task force with Zach Goldsmith for a while. I've served on the Olympic 2012 committee for the food standards there, and I've also was part of the Food for Life standard setting body. So trying to be in there for the voice of health and sustainability, but in a way that works for everybody, so that there is also the money flowing through that chain to make sure that that quality can be upheld. I'm known as a bit of a procurement nerd, so I'm very delighted to join this seminar because I know that nerdism is actually appreciated. But I am deeply concerned on your behalf that public sector catering is not treated with more status, because we know that it's the foundation of people's well-being, their sense of purpose, how a whole institution works, the whole culture of a place. How do we make sure that that is valued?
Okay, that's interesting, because I wanted to ask you about how you feel the COVID pandemic has affected the perception of the sector in government, first of all, but also among people more generally.
Well, my goodness me. Well, I mean, people have at last noticed. I think it takes a crisis for people to notice that food matters. You know, that otherwise people rather take it for granted that it just arrives, it's on the shelf or it's on your plate, or that you've got enough money for it. Obviously you don't if you're living in poverty. But so the COVID pandemic has made people aware of the insecurity of our food system and how much it relies on really amazing people who are passionate about food to keep it on, make it arrive on time, delicious, healthy, good for us, meeting our desires and our cultural expectations. So I think there's an awareness of that insecurity now, and some of the ways to address that. But then you asked, what has government noticed of it? I don't think government's even thought about the public sector within this. I mean, it's been absolutely dreadful on that front. So a lot of the effort has gone into making sure that there's food on the shelves in the supermarkets. But it took months for them to be talking to wholesalers and for them to be talking to caterers about, you know, who were already in trouble because of the whole Brexit shenanigans of the year previously to the COVID pandemic. So, and people were knocking on the doors of government to say, can you notice, please, that this is really expensive to put things in warehouses, and that, you know, having no sense of what's going on is incredibly difficult to plan for. So what concerned me was the immediate jump to giving tokens for going to supermarkets. And yeah, fantastic that there was a response to poverty and saying children who are coming out of schools, you know, are going to be in trouble here. And I do understand that tokens isn't easy. Well, it turned out to be not very easy, did it? But tokens and food boxes getting sent out feels like a solution, but actually there was no consideration to the fact that there were lots of businesses who had catering staff and kitchens who could have actually turned up the service to be doing Meals on Wheels services, could actually have been making quality, keeping those supply chains alive during the early stages of COVID. I mean, what a mess that was. But no blame attached. Of course, it was total panic, but not looking around and seeing what services, qualities, passionate people, people with skills, all those wonderful actual caterers who had their blooming food safety certificates available. You know, there was a lot of capacity there that could have just been asked to say, what should we do together? One of the things we've learned during COVID is how creative and wonderful people can be when given the agency to respond. There are some fabulous examples all over the country of school kitchens, hospital kitchens who turned over their services, not just to doing the service they already did, but also to help the community. And they are utterly wonderful and they get talked about all the time and turn up on telly and stuff. But why wasn't that true everywhere? We've had crises before. We know that that capacity could be there. In France, in Paris, they have a plan for extreme weather events that says, turn up the Meals on Wheels services for old people stuck at home, because they've kept the memory of crisis in government. They kept the memory of how to do that, and they have a game plan for crisis when it affects large populations of people. And we need to be part of that. And we need to be shouting about what we can do and the value of the public sector and the skills of the public sector, the capacity to respond, to really put ourselves right in the heart of that.
Okay, so essentially you don't believe then that there was either any or enough consultation with the food service sector in planning both for Brexit and for COVID?
Absolutely not. I mean, really, we were, well, Andy, you and I worked together on trying to get voices raised. We were desperately trying to get questions in Parliament. We were desperately trying to get newspaper stories in order to get people to notice what was going on. And there was very top level intervention. And again, I sort of understand it. Government likes giving out very large checks, as we've seen with PPE, to one company who will then deliver it all and fix it all in one go, rather than looking at dispersed capacity, local knowledge, local authority, integration of services. You know, where does the knowledge sit about who needs to be reached at local authority level? Yet there wasn't that trust in the, and that's also true of actually the test and trace services and all kinds of things, that the knowledge sits locally, the greeny detail sits locally, some of the budgets sit locally, certainly the skills, contacts, get on the phone to people who you know, it sits locally. And that's the way we can respond, not just in crisis, but every day. I mean, there's lots of people who need that kind of support. And how do we get public sector institutions understood as part of the patchwork of absolute gems of response, care, support for the community, support for better nutrition, support for farmers? We should be supporting farmers, you know, in the agroecological future that we need because of climate change. All of that is, you know, the reason we focus on public sector is because it's our money. So we can be saying we could do this well and make sure that that money goes fairly within that supply chain so that it really can work. And there's loads of really good stuff going on, but it still doesn't become policy, does it? It still doesn't become absolute something that we all do as a right and as a normal activity.
So how can the public sector catering do better at making its voice heard at government level then?
Well, here's one opportunity immediately. So I've been having a chat with the National Food Strategy team. So Henry Dimbleby, who is Executive Director at DEFRA, has been charged with doing this National Food Strategy. He's a good bloke and he's got a good team with him. And I've been saying to them, look, you need to get the people who actually do this stuff in to have a chat about what we can, you know, what everybody can commit to, especially if you're going to be looking at less and better meat type stuff and more veg, and, you know, making sure public sector contracts can help SMEs get into the supply chain in a sensible way and all that kind of stuff. And of course, the team are relatively new to this area and aren't necessarily having worked in public sector catering, and we all know how technical that can be. So I asked them, would they be up for having a meeting with sector bodies from public sector catering? And they said yes. So let's open that door and let's go in it together and let's plan in advance the key things we want said, because we also know how complicated this sector is. So I think we tend to go into it like I'm doing now, going, blah, 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 there's so many things, it's so exciting and there's so many possibilities. Let's go in with 5 or 6 things that we really, really would like them to do. Make friends, start building that. Because every single government strategy I've ever seen come out always says the importance of public sector catering. You know, at one point, I went to our dear old friend Mike Duckett, you know, sadly lost last year, great mate, lovely man, and said to him, you know, how many times have you been told in a new government strategy that the public sector catering is the one place where something change can happen? And he took me into his office down at the Royal Brompton and he showed me all of the reports. And it felt then he said, oh, I use them for insulation now, Kath, because there were so many reports saying the potential of public sector. And he let me stay in his office for the next hour and I photographed all of the reports and then did a report showing, another report, but showing all of that work that had gone in, but not actually, it's not required, the budget gets cut, the government, you know, changes their minds all the time. It doesn't get audited, so nobody goes and checks that it's happening, so it drifts away and you have to wait for another crisis for anybody to notice that it matters. So, you know, I worked on the Public Sector for Food Procurement Initiative. How long ago is that now, Andy and David? 20 years ago, possibly? That was out of Foot and Mouth, wasn't it? Oh, look, another crisis. Came out of BSE and Foot and Mouth. Oh, let's put farming back on its feet and we'll use public sector procurement to fix it. Well, COVID's the same thing. It's been another disease that's laid waste our country and our economy. Public sector procurement must be used as part of that to help farmers, to provide healthy food. But where the money goes should be to locality and to where those commissioning services are. And also we should be reinstating Meals on Wheels services, and they should be integrated with public sector so that they're done really well with all the knowledge we've got. But I think it does take you guys, you know, I'm pointing at lots of people who are invisible at the moment, but you guys to come together to be a voice to say that, possibly quite angrily, who knows? But before Priti Patel bans any protest, perhaps we could be out on the street about it. Maybe not. We tend to run dinners, don't we, instead? But yeah.
So, I mean, you believe then that there's a very positive message that the sector can take to government that might persuade them that with better support, they can help to deliver the government's own aims?
Always and absolutely. And I also think it would be really nice to think about how it's presented as more than a meal, because I think in high government, they don't cook, they don't go shopping, they don't really know about food, it just arrives. So there is something about showing how it's integrated into social services, if it's Meals on Wheels, education, if it's schools, in the hospital, it's part of the whole well-being of that person and, you know, how they're treated as a human being, and also about their getting better, you know, all of the different ways of presenting it, but saying fundamentally, if food is not valued, then there is something going wrong in a service.
Okay. Now, what needs to be done to change the government perception and to show that the benefits provided by public sector amount to more than simply good nutrition?
Well, I think jumping on various agendas at the moment, for example, all the climate change stuff. Well, I just met with a couple of members of the House of Lords yesterday to talk about why food is invisible in the COP26 climate change stuff that's coming up. So, you know, public sector food will be one of the few levers that government could say that they were doing something positive on the whole climate change agenda, whether that's using more sustainably produced produce, more British produce, more fruit and vegetables in the dinners, you know, all those sorts of things. That could be and should be one of their key things, but they keep on coming out with statements that are only about energy, cars, infrastructure, big kit that you can put labels on, as my colleague always says. So presenting and saying, here we are, you guys have already made a commitment to 20% less meat and dairy, but for that to be better quality where it is used to help farmers. So, you know, if we can do that balancing to make it show that it's perfectly possible to do this in a very sensible way without breaking, you know, any, you know, not without it actually collapsing the system. I've got some stats on that, actually. We're going to come to that in a minute, actually, I think. But so that's climbing on that agenda. Climbing also on the agenda of helping farming, which is not getting the right kind of support at the moment. On the showing the value, I mean, the trouble is it has so much value that perhaps we need to come down to a few things that we know government will listen to. So I'm thinking climate, I'm thinking green jobs in the green recovery post-COVID, and I'm thinking about health, because, you know, obviously that health thing is going to continue to be terribly important.
All right. Interesting you should mention the COP26 Climate Summit in Glasgow later this year, because the PSC 100 group has made an application for participation. If they are successful, how do you feel the opportunity could best be used?
I think there's something, governments are a bit scared of intervening on food. And it's very, I often observe this and think, what is it? And is it something about worrying about being the nanny state or something? Boris Johnson himself once said, you can't take the meat out of my hand because I'm having a barbecue and don't touch my meat type thing. And you're like, well, that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about going 100% vegetarian or anything like that. We're talking about dealing with waste. We're talking about healthier diets. We're talking about taking a lot of junk food out of, you know, promotion and not upselling Mars bars all the time. You know, other chocolate bars are very available. So is there something about saying, well, if national government can't stomach that, pun intended, then can we show, like America did when a lot of the cities started going, well, we're making the commitment and we're just getting on with it. And we're making the space in which those things become more normal. There's a culture shift, being able to, you know, actually public sector catering holds the keys to culture shift in some ways, of saying, let's make great food celebratory and beautiful and part of the message. And, you know, sustainable fish is on the menu and it's absolutely robustly sustainable because we've got standards for it. And, you know, and like all that messaging can come through it, but let's show that cities are committing to it. Let's show that public sector caterers are already doing it and making it perfectly possible and wonderful, you know. And I think a few cities could be up for making big commitments. And my colleague Ruth, who couldn't be with us today because she's away on annual leave, but she's been working up a toolkit of some things that cities can do. And we work with the Sustainable Food Places Network, which is about 50 towns and cities around the UK. Ruth took the back of the envelope and just looked at all of the climate commitments that the cities had done, and food's hardly mentioned in there. It's this funny invisibility of our favourite thing. Well, let's make it real. Let's say, here's the bit. This is what it means. Why don't you do it with us in enthusiasm as well? Because I think one of the wonderful things about food is we can bring some joy with it, as well as some serious-minded campaigning instinct, and say, here's some solutions, and it's perfectly possible to do it. The great thing about caterers is we roll our sleeves up and say, let's get it done. And, you know, that spirit taken to COP, and also providing some solutions, because otherwise it's just going to be top line sort of vague commitments above governments rather than the practicalities of making change happen. We're in an emergency, guys. We have to treat it like that, and we have to be the driver for it, and probably not wait for government to do it. Because, I mean, even yesterday we got a question asked in the House of Lords to the Minister saying, you know, why is food not mentioned in any of the government things? And they went, oh, it's terribly important. Yes, absolutely, it's terribly important. That was the answer. You know, and that doesn't smell of an emergency to me. No. We can provide the numbers. We can say we're doing it and we need this kind of support, and we'll deliver on some of your numbers for you and some of your cultural stuff and some of your health at the same time, but you've got to help us to do that. And here are the 5 things you can do to help.
Okay. You mentioned the National Food Strategy a little bit earlier, which is, as far as I know, due to report at some time later this year, the second part to be delivered. Is there still time for us to get involved in that?
Yes, there's always time. Even if people say it's closed, there's always time. But I talked to the National Food Strategy people, and I think my impression is that what's going to happen is they'll publish something quite shortly, like May-ish sort of time, and then go on a roadshow or a virtual roadshow to talk to various groupings. And that could be, as I said, I was offering the idea that we might try and coordinate something with public sector bodies and say what could look like delivery. And I think we've got to give them confidence that some of the things that you want to do are perfectly feasible, and that they'd have a gang of lovely people wanting to work with them and make that path feel like it's something, you know, that would be welcomed. I mean, obviously challenging them if there are things that are not good enough, but so let's set something up for April, May, so that and just go in there and say, yay, hello, right, this is what we want to do, join us.
Okay. Now, last year, the PSC 100 group members adopted the 20% less but better meat campaign. How can we make that the norm in the public sector, and what would it look like as a buying standard?
Oh, now I find this fascinating, because as I say, me coming from a catering background, I kind of want to know about the practicalities, because there's been loads of reports that sort of model things at a macro scale. What I love about what you guys have done is just gone ahead and done it. There's this lovely thing about hanging out with people in the food service sector. There's this lovely practicality of like, well, just start. Why don't we just start doing that? So I do honour to the fact that you just went ahead. And you know, and then we learn by doing, don't we? We learn by doing, and we look at what's available in the larder or in the fridge and say, well, you know, what meals can we make with what we do have, and start to buy in a different way. When it turns into a buying standard, I think it's really interesting, because when you say less but better, you know, we immediately get into definitions of what is better. That, I think that is all understood territory, what better is. It might not have necessarily been accepted in government buying standards, and I was involved partly in lobbying on the government buying standards, so I do understand that the details in there are quite, you know, difficult. So let's get it defined, the better, in government buying standards, so that everybody knows what they're working on. But I'm quite interested in this 20% less. You immediately get into less than what? How do I know that I've succeeded? How do I know if I've gone low enough? You know, how do I know I'm using the right alternatives and I'm not just putting in something that's also got high carbon footprint, whatever? Do I just cut out beef? I mean, all of these sort of slightly simplistic things that start happening. What I like the idea of, and as I say, coming from a catering background, is that somebody is just told per head of your service or per cover, you need to be about this average of meat or dairy, or whatever it is that we're defining as this less, over the whole picture. So that average per head or per cover amount is this, and it's up to you how you achieve that. It might be that you have a vegetarian day. It might be that you do a paella, which has small bits of meat in it, because that's still a meat dish, but it's got slightly less in it. It might be that you have hearty soup and bread day, and again, that's using bits of carcasses which can be turned into, you know, good stock. And it's like, put the creativity back onto the caterer and make the numbers simple. So when I look at carbon calculators and stuff, I go, oh, I can't imagine that in a kitchen when your hands are covered in pastry and you're in the midst of your computers in a different office, and you know, how are you going to record numbers on what you've been used? And carbon calculators, I think, are for people who enjoy carbon calculators. They aren't necessarily for caterers. They can be. I mean, lots of people do enjoy using them. Do if you wish. But it feels horribly complicated. It also varies a lot. So if you swap in your peas for your beans one day, what does that mean? If they were air freighted, how different does that mean? Catering is also creative in that you use lots of different amounts. So this idea of having a kind of carbon meat allowance per head or per cover in some way, I'm sure there'd be complications in bringing that in. But then that's a nice simple reporting thing, because it's just the volume of meat you've bought, you know, in proportion to the number of people or the number of covers. So we were wondering, and Andrew might like to come in, Andrew Archer, I was wondering if we could just put up a little poll to say what people thought of that idea, which is, what do you think of a flexible meat allowance where the caterer themselves gets to decide how to spend that? It's almost like a budget, isn't it? And here's our 3 possible responses. And I don't, you know, sounds good, I'd like to find out more. It's a good idea, but there might be challenges. Or I have a better idea. And then we can invite the better ideas in the chat in a minute. So if people wanted to take a couple of minutes just to think about that. And I'll describe it again. The idea is you'd have a total amount of meat you could serve to the amount of people that you serve. And then once it's run out, it's run out. But that means you get creative within the amount that you've got.
We've pretty much had everyone's votes that are going to vote now. So
That's lovely. Thank you guys. I'm really fascinated to see that result. Shall I? I'm going to put sounds good. Is that cheating?
Right. Results. There you go.
Oh, look at you. Oh, bless you. Maybe because I was being enthusiastic about it, but I genuinely think it was like a light bulb going off for me when we thought about that. We just sat down and said, what would it actually be like to have to do a carbon calculator in a busy kitchen, and the kinds of busy kitchens I've been in my life. And I just thought, hey, let's just make this nice and straightforward. And also people can then bid for that amount of meat. You know, we can turn it into the contractual amount that institution is able to serve during a year. And then all the creativity goes into what you do instead. So that's a kind of idea. And if you've got any ideas that you want to share in the chat, please do, and I shall keep a copy of it all. And also, if you're interested in this National Food Strategy engagement, please be in touch. In fact, I shall right now put my email address, because I can see there's about 80 people. I can handle 80 emails, can't I? What am I doing? Anyway, and let me, oh, sorry, the one thing I did want to bring up in all of that is my colleague Ruth also sent me before she went away. It's not that hard, actually, because looking at the amount of meals, there's an organisation called the Eating Better Alliance who's done a little analysis on the data that's available to show how much meat per head different aspects of the public sector are using already. And in education, it's not that far off already what that up top meat allowance would be. So we reckon it might be about 23 grams a meal. That does not mean that each person gets 23 grams. It means that's the amount that's available that could be shared out. So in education at the moment, it's around about 22. There we go. It's not actually that hard. However, once you get up to MOD, colleges, universities, it's more around the sort of 40-ish mark. But that kind of targeted thing, actually schools could be told, you're doing fine. You could, if that the data is correct, and would know when to stop. You don't have to keep on going down forever. You know what you've got. Middle age education, secondaries are a little bit higher, but it's not by much. By the look of it, it's about 26 grams per meal average. So it's really the adult stuff where we would be looking at possible changes. But then also public sector could say, we're doing it. Wouldn't it be lovely to be able to give awards to people for having achieved it in a really creative way that also supported health and also supported farmers? And also we wouldn't have to get into the fights that have happened over individuals going, well, I've cut out beef, so I've done it. And poor beef farmers then go, hey, hang on a minute, we're supporting really good farming with biodiversity. Why have we been penalized? Actually, the differences between different types of meats are not that great. It's the overall meat. And we don't just want to all shift to chicken who are eating soya that's been made from deforested land in South America. So this feels like a reasonable, sensible, practical way forward in which the rolling up our sleeves instinct could really come to the fore. So I'm delighted to take any questions about any of that at any point, and also to keep on taking ideas about how we can really do this in practice. And I'm really delighted to champion that with the National Food Strategy and government and COP26 whenever we possibly can.
That's terrific, Kath. Thank you very much. And you're absolutely right. We are capturing everything that you're saying in the chat as well, because I know there's some sort of interesting conversations that are popping up in that. So we'll be able to follow up on that. But I'd like,
yeah, why don't we try drafting the standard also? I mean, we have an occasion, that's my instinct as a campaigner, is not to wait for people to get on with stuff, it's just to do it. And then somebody says, oh, your line 3 doesn't make sense. And you go, why don't you adapt line 3 then? It's like I think a more front-footed approach to saying this is how it should be. The professionals are here, who know what they're doing. Come on, guys, you need to step up to it.
Right, okay. I'd like to get the reaction of our 2 other panelists now. Bethan, can I turn to you? An awful lot to take in there, but what are your sort of initial thoughts on what you've heard from Kath?
Thank you very much, Kath, for that presentation. I think, at the very start, you talked about the challenge of the last 12 months. I think no one in the supply chain or food and farming can't speak right now without acknowledging not just the amazing work that people have done, but to keep both food going into retail, food going into public sector. It's just been an enormous task. So, we're at the bottom end of the supply chain, but we've really valued every part of that to keep food going to hospitals, food going to schools, and food keeping us fed. I think from our perspective, we've got kind of 2 big ambitions. Realistically, it's a key point right now in terms of public sector procurement. We've had EU exit, we've had the huge impact of market disruption on COVID, and for the NFU in particular, we've worked very hard on food standards over the last year. For us, we are really fighting to make sure that our market, our very high environmental standards, our very high welfare standards are not undercut. So we share quite a lot of your ambitions around maintaining food standards, about maintaining the strength in our British food. But also the other element of it is the fact that for us, one of our other massive ambitions is net zero. So the NFU has launched our net zero by 2040. And we're really, really keen to have a conversation about all markets about this. So, there are many elements to net zero. You talk about carbon calculators, they are incredibly overwhelming and there's many different elements of them. So it's very hard, but we need kind of a nuanced and a really good conversation about how farmers and farming can work with the wider supply chain about utilising British food. If you are looking to reduce the impact of carbon or the environment within your business, then if food and farming and food producers are committed to net zero, that's a huge part of your story. And by sourcing British food, that is a big step forward. So I think I would personally, I'm here on behalf of the NFU, we would love to have a conversation with the food sector more about how we can work together, how we can have conversations and how we can champion British food. I also quickly want to talk about, you talk about government and engaging with government. I think we've got a couple of challenges. One, every department looks at it in a different way, and there's fantastic work at a departmental level. That hospital food review by Philip Shelley has been fantastic, and we've seen great pieces of work. But there's no overarching commitment or strategic kind of commitment to a renewed approach. We've seen recently an effort submission. We've seen the Cabinet Office Green Paper on food procurement, and I think this is a really good opportunity now for government to step back and really look at all elements in which it can, one, source more British food and deliver essentially nutritious, affordable food throughout the public sector. That is our ambition. Our ambition, last year in COVID, when it first happened, we had members ringing all the time saying, we want to supply our local schools, we want to supply our local NHS. We really, really want to serve our fantastic product to this market. So now it's like asking government two things. One, how you can, champion British food, make sure that British food is at the heart of any procurement policy. The second half of it is, how do we get through some of these challenges in the supply chain? So how can we get more SMEs supplying the market, both at primary and secondary level? How we can look at a market accessibility, both at a local authority level, but in terms of wider contracts. So I think my big kind of aim in the next year is to work with government on both, one, championing how they can embed British food in their procurement policy, and two, how can we make markets more accessible to them fantastic people buying and serving and cooking, and we know you do a fantastic job, can utilise British food more. And that's all packaged around, making sure that our standards are upheld. In the government buying standard review, we look forward to responding to that consultation this summer, and also about our net zero as well. I really want to make it very clear that please get in touch with us. We really want to talk to everyone about our ambition, net zero by 2040, big ambition, but we're working very hard to get there. So thank you very much. I'm sorry, I've whizzed through about 20 topics there, but Kath, you covered a lot in your opening speech.
That's great. Thank you very much, Bethan. Andy, your thoughts from what you've heard so far?
Well, as ever, Kath, inspirational and motivational. Everything you've said is absolutely defined and encapsulated. A couple of things though I think I took away from that is, I will commit with and work with Andrew to getting the chairs together. Let's sit down with Henry's team. Let's get the building blocks in place. If we set our agenda, as you said, and clearly set out what we want, write our own statement, our own policy, present that, they can then change it themselves. But I think that's the starting block with Henry and the team, and we'll commit to that next week. But, it's interesting that the government issued a 10-point plan, which we've discussed in the past, Kev, back in November, and no mention was made of food and farming. Astonishing. Doesn't that really say what the government, they talk about food being the sustainable life, but they just don't get it. The public sector is the art of the community. You said about how can we get SMEs, how can we get the local and the crisis management. I've always said, when you buy a house, you buy it near a school and you buy it near a hospital. You buy it, so the public sector is the heart of the community. So the councils should be delegated down. Maybe it's a time to look at, as they did many, many years ago, the Ministry of Food. So it's actually, we report to one body. It's something that the government have really got to take. The public sector, we can define it. We are probably the biggest procurement of food net after supermarkets. If you put them all the supermarkets together, we're not going to get near them. But if you take the individual supermarkets, we buy a massive food. We've got to look at how we get local SMEs involved, get British first into that establishment, look at the seasonality of the food. But I think that's all going to come from us making our own stance on our own destinies and bringing this to the government. Kath used the word, we've got to be on the front foot. We have certainly got to be on that. And this is our opportunity. The pandemic has brought some positives and some weaknesses. And we've got to make sure that the government hear us and realise, you know, the government fund us, for goodness sake. And yet they seem to ignore our voice. Now's the time for us to say, we have got a voice. This is us as all the associations. This is what we want. And this is how we see you delivering that. If we set that out clearly to them, they have to listen. And we also then get the local environments, the local councils on our side. You know, I see different sides of the Four Nations have already strive for that, and you're seeing the improvements already. You know, the health of the nation starts in the public sector. We are the people who influence the health of the nation, whether it be for schools, whether it be in health, whether it be in care. We influence the health of the nation, and we've got to make sure the government realise that we have to have that voice at that table. And I think working with Henry and his team will be the building blocks to that. But I think we've got to get our act together really quickly now, and let's get this meeting moving and support Kath in the aims, you know, and say to them, why weren't we on this 10-point plan? Why wasn't food and farming included? It amazed me when it came out, you know, that it really did. It's a shocking statement how they talk about it, but then they don't want to deliver it at the end. They ignore it. You know, Kath's carbon calculators, I've sat on the fence probably, and that's unlike me to sit on the fence. I'm normally one side, but I think Kath's right. So, you know, how does a chef in the kitchen measure that? I think we need to look at a different way of delivering it. Waste is certainly something caterers have got in our own destiny. And I think, you know, using the likes of RAP and the guardians of grub, well, let's enhance what they've got. Let's work with them instead of trying to silo ourselves and reinvent that wheel. The wheel's there. Let's work together and make the government hear us.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Andy. I wanted to turn now to one or two of the questions that we've got coming in. And first up is one from Jane Jones, who says that in Denmark, the UN sustainable goals are built into public food procurement. And she's wondering whether that's something that should happen here. And if so, what's sort of the first step towards trying to get that to happen? Kath, do you have any thoughts?
I really do. I think we should write a government buying standard that we're prepared to support. Yeah. Let's just do it. Because, you know, the knowledge is in this virtual room. And it shouldn't look too different from what it is now, because we're not trying to absolutely revolutionize everything, but we would like to pin down some details and also some measurables and ones that work for the sector. That's my idea.
Thank you. Bethan, you talked quite passionately about the NFU's commitment to net zero by 2040. Would you see this move as helping you in achieving that aim?
So I think our aim to really deliver has to be with all markets and all different areas of the supply chain. We need to get everyone bought into ambition, because we can't have food and farming committed to net zero and other sectors not. So yeah, it's a collective aim. What I would pick up on the question about government and what the UK government can do, we have the government buying standards that's going to be reviewed, but we also have the balanced scorecard, which was, you know, came out of 2014. You know, it sets a really good framework to procure product, not just on price, but on other social values. Now, we know how much that price is a huge driver in this market. And, you know, as every time we speak, we're very sympathetic to how you deliver such delicious food on such small budgets. But for the government to lead by example, and that's what we're wanting them to do, we're wanting government to lead by example in how you procure, cook and serve food. We need to make sure that, you know, the balanced scorecard is embedded into contracts, that we're buying on multiple social values, not just on price. We've got to look at the government buying standards to make sure particularly that we can't buy product that can't be produced to standards that we produce to. We can't be undercut. And we need a collective review of procurement going forward. We need, you know, government now to sit back and look at the green paper in terms of in terms of procurement structures, look at government buying standards reviews, look at the national food strategy, and say, how do we collectively look at everything and build a procurement system for public sector that utilises great food and serves fantastic, delicious meals to schools, hospitals, throughout. So yeah, I would quickly pick up that balanced scorecard.
Okay.
Can I just add, sorry, very briefly, can we also, if we're doing this, because I think it sounds like a fantastic thing to do, is to get a trade lawyer involved? Because unfortunately, although we're now free to make all of our own decisions post-Brexit, there is an element of, if we set policy on public sector procurement, that is open to challenge from trading partner countries at the WTO level. We know this because at the moment, the government's obesity strategy has been taken to the WTO in order to allow trading partners to object to things like stopping junk food marketing in supermarkets. They can object if they wish, they might not. I'm waiting with bated breath to find out if we get away with it. But all I'm saying is, let's do something really practical that will solve government's problems. Let's make it easy for them to go, oh, that looks like a good idea, but also have answered all the difficult questions that anybody might throw at us. Because before, we were always told, oh, the European rules won't allow it. Turned out not to be true. Now they'll say, oh, but the WTO rules don't allow it. So let's make sure that it's proofed against that in advance, and we just go in saying, yep, sorted, it's fine, this lawyer said.
So picking up on that point, before we were a member of the GPA and the WTO rules in our previous relationship, we're now still members of the General Procurement Agreement, the GPA. And one of the points in the EFRA committee, which Victoria Prentice raised and that we pushed the minister on, was within that system, how can we still procure, support and back British food producers? And that was asked of Minister Prentice within the EFRA inquiry. We're waiting on a response from EFRA in the next couple of weeks and months, and then obviously government will have to respond thereafter. But the question is, within a new trading relationship, how do we maximise the potential of this market for both the consumers and the food producers within the constraints of the GPA? And I think that if you look at other countries, France has a real strong commitment to local and seasonal. They've made it possible. There are opportunities within this space to have real strong commitments to domestic sourcing. But from my point of view, I urge Minister Prentice to come out as quickly as possible with their response after the EFRA report and really pick up. I know that the DEFRA lawyers are looking at this, how within this new framework, as a third party, still bound by the GPA, can we make sure that we maximise all potential of this market for British food producers?
Okay, thank you for that. Andy, can I bring you in on this? Sort of buying standards and sort of knitting them together so they work to help support British farming as well?
Yeah, I think we need to relook at them. I mean, Kath and I was on with DEFRA looking at the government buying standards, and it got put on hold 2 years ago. It was the planning of, they went into, we need to plan for hard Brexit mode. So, there is a revised one allegedly around. Nobody seems to know where it is currently. So I do think it's a prime opportunity now for us to shape our own destiny in the government buying standard, to ensure that we protect the farmers as well in the UK, but also to make it auditable. The current one is not auditable. I've recently written to DEFRA asking them, are we fully compliant to government buying standards in the public sector? The response is 100%, every sector is fully compliant. Now, how can they make that statement? So I've asked them to clarify how they've got to that statement. I'm yet to get an answer back from them. So I think, it's our opportunity to drive forward here and really embed these so it covers everything from schools, health, care homes, Meals on Wheels, prisons, MOD. We really embed this into it, universities, and we set our own destiny on these government buying standards. They're there, we just need to make sure that they're robust for what we want, not what other people want of us. So we deliver. We know better, as Kath said. The brains in this webinar absolutely could nail this and give us something that's tangible. And we've got to tap into those brains.
Okay, thank you for that. I wanted to move on now to another point that's come up, and the suggestion is that perhaps there are too many groups passing opinion to government to be really effective. Now, I wonder how practical it would be for the organisations that are represented in this webinar today, where we've got obviously Kath from Sustain, we've got Bethan from the NFU, we've got caterers. I mean, what is the practicalities of bringing all those voices together to talk on the key issues with one voice? Is it something that could happen, Kath?
I run an alliance of 100 organisations. We won the sugary drinks tax. And it was by getting together, having our fights in private and coming out very robustly on the few things that we wanted to achieve together. And it involved hundreds of people and organisations unifying behind something, and then eventually Treasury going, oh, I get the point of this, we'll be able to hypothecate money to go to children's health. I think things can be done if it's done in the right spirit. And I think again, I mentioned at the beginning, we've illustrated what happens when we talk about food. It all gets very complicated and, plural. That's what we love about it, of course. Food is utterly wonderful because it encompasses everything. But if you want to win something with government, you come in with clear paths to something sensible to happen. They want to hear particularly about the problem. They want to hear about a solution, and for it to be backed by the kind of people that they will hold as respectable. NFU, public sector catering bodies, trade bodies. Who's friends? What friends could we bring behind some really key asks and just say this is how it should be? I think that again, that front-footed approach makes things possible.
Okay, thank you. Bethan, your thoughts on the practicalities of pulling together an alliance such as that?
I think if we look back to last year on the standards and trade piece, that across industry everyone was singing off the same hymn sheet. We saw real success. So we know that when the voices come together, that we can make real impact with government. So yeah, I mean, collaboration works really well. Yeah, I look forward to having a discussion.
Okay, Andy.
Yeah, I think collaboration's the way forward. I think we've already proven what we can do in the 20% less meat but better campaign. We all work together. The NFU, everybody worked together with the associations, and look what we achieved in a short space of time. Now's the time. Let's do it.
Okay, I guess one sort of other aspect of the fragmentation is not simply the collective voice that you all could bring together, but to where to direct that, because someone has already made the point that not all of the government departments necessarily are talking to each other. They're looking at things separately. You've also got the 4 home nations, if you like, with different ideas about the way things work. So if we could all come together as one, where would be the sort of best place to direct that message? Kath?
Well, we've mentioned a few of them here, haven't we? Government Buying Standards Review, the National Food Strategy, COP26. These are rallying points, and obviously different parts of one's message gets emphasised at different times, whether it's the support for farmers or the support for health. All of the messages are there all at the same time. We can do this, 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 and this. But for COP, it's the climate part. For government buying standards, it's the, look, here's a standard that actually works, and all the public sector caterers have said so. So why don't you just adopt it? And take some pain away from the people who have to make the decisions. Make friends with some people in the civil service who are prepared to, have that conversation and see us as allies in making it sorted out. They would love to see a whole bunch of people coming and saying, we're not going to fight you on this if you do the thing we do. And here's all the people in the room who will help it land well. Some of the National Food Strategy stuff they're a bit nervous about how it all might land, because they're saying some quite radical things about climate emergency. And so they need to talk to people to make sure it lands well and people aren't just shocked by something arriving that might say something radical. So again, if we can present, here are some solutions, well worked up, backed by some really good guys, you're going to find a nice path forwards with this. Then, as I say, a few key things coming up are exactly those.
You seem to be suggesting almost attaching to issues rather than just to a particular organisation or government level.
Yes, and we often say you go and find the people who are prepared to respond. So you go in, you can't push against brick walls, and there are a lot of brick walls around, particularly around COP26 at the moment. So you just keep on going around until you find some allies who are up for trying to open doors. And we know people in Parliament, we know people in the House of Lords between us. Goodness me, you know the head of catering for the House of Parliament. I was once at a meal that he cooked, run by PSC 100. It was utterly amazing. It's like who could he leave some messages on plates? That might be helpful. Let's get creative about who we know and what they need to hear. But as I say, not going in with complicated things, going in with, we've written a government buying standard and we really like them to consider it. Here it is. And can you get us the right audience, the right people who are going to make the decisions? Can you bump it up for us?
Okay. Andy, we've got another question in, which is talking about carbon calculators. Now, Kath wasn't the biggest fan in the world, and you've got your reservations, but I mean, do you see an opportunity for them to be able to be used creatively to help?
I do, if they're correctly organised and ran. I think the problem I've got is I'm still unclear how we will measure and what we'll be measuring. So I just feel a little bit nervous. And if, we've got to make it that everybody fully understands how they work. Because if we don't, we'll never get the true information out of it. So I think that's why I'm not yet convinced. And probably I'm talking myself out of something. I agreed a year ago, let's move a carbon calculator forward. But I think we just need to be clear how we do it and make it as simple as possible. Let's not overcomplicate it. When we overcomplicate it, that's when we start getting issues and people not putting the correct data in because they just don't, we don't understand.
Okay, thank you.
But can I just pick up on Kath's point about, going to, let's go to the right people. I think in government sometimes it's not the right, Kath's right, it's that approach. I want to try to do something in the NHS. I was getting sort of not a wall, but not the open door at Department of Health, where you would have thought that was when. You go to the Cabinet Office, 2 calls later, it's happening. Because you'd engaged with somebody who wanted it to happen.
Simon Stevens was one of the most supportive people on the sugar tax stuff, and he was terribly helpful. He even agreed to run a pilot within the NHS to prove that big institutions were quite happy to have a go with it, which really helped break the back of the idea that nobody wanted it.
Yeah, so sometimes you think, I'll go there because they're in charge of food, i.e. DEFRA. But, I went to the Cabinet Office and, wow, I was amazed. 2 calls and the door was opened and we delivered it.
Okay, thank you for that. Bethan, can I bring you in just for a quick point on the sort of carbon calculators, carbon trackers? Is this something that's being picked up in the farming community, and is there sort of an agreed general approach, or is it is a bit of a sort of a fragmented picture?
I think it's definitely something that we're looking at in the farming community. I think that alongside of our net zero ambition, we're doing lots of work in understanding the role that farming has to play within this goal. And it's about, for us, there are a lot of big statements made about agriculture, but actually British farming has an excellent story to tell. Our beef emissions is 50% of the global average. That's because over 70% of our beef is grass-fed, and we have got the climate for fantastic meat, fantastic dairy production. So I think it's something that we're obviously really looking at. I think there's many options in terms of what carbon calculators there are out there, and they all give slightly different results and look in different aspects. From our point of view, it's about understanding what's out there, working with them a solution, but understanding actually British farmers can be a part of this conversation. COP is coming up in November. How can we talk about the work of agriculture, carbon cycling, carbon stores, grassland, the amount of carbon stored in grassland. There are loads of different solutions to that. The other point I just want to pick up on in this collaboration piece is that I think collaboration is really important, but one of the things that we really must get right within this government piece is data collection. because how do you benchmark success, or how do we know what's happening now and steps taken without good data collection? The balanced scorecard has the mystery shopper. We know that there are certain mechanisms there to look at it, but we don't know, the scale in which food is produced, procured within different procurement systems. I would really call for government to look at whatever strategy they go forward and how they listen to industry, is to make data collection a really big part of that. So then we can learn from it, we can grow, we can benchmark success, and we can work, together with around that. So that was just a quick pickup from that. But very happy to have conversations around our net zero ambition, around carbon calculators. We've been looking at them, across our whole membership, and there's loads of case studies on our website as well about some of our farmers and what they're doing to reduce their impact.
Lovely, thank you. I'm conscious now that we are sort of winding down our hour, and I don't want to keep people over time here. So maybe a good opportunity now just to do a quick wrap up with a sort of a final thought. Andy?
I think for me, it's let's just get this done. Let's get the meeting with Henry in place. Let's get the PSC 100 chairs around the table. Let's make it happen. Let's start setting our own way forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Bethan, did you have any sort of final takeaway thought for us?
Just kind of 4 points really. How can public sector catering support agriculture and to allow, our sector to grow? How can we uphold our UK standards? How can standards be at the heart of all of this? How can we get a more fair and transparent supply chain? How can we work with you within that? And also, we think that British farmers have a great story to tell. So how can we celebrate that, and how can we champion British agri-food? So yeah, it's been delightful to be on the call today. Thank you very much for having us, and I look forward to working with everyone in the future.
You're very welcome. It was nice to have you join us. Kath, final word for you.
Let's do something as a result of this session, so we can put a blue plaque on it and say it started here. And so I'm with Andy Jones on that. It's always lovely working with you, Andy, anyway. So let's have some fun with it as well in slightly cheeky campaign mode. Front foot forward.
Front foot forward. Okay, a good point on which to end. Thank you very much. That, I'm afraid, has to be it for today. My thanks once again to Kath, Bethan and Andy, and to you for joining us. There will be a link to the full recording of this webinar available next week on the Public Sector Catering website. On the slides coming up, you will see that our next webinar will be on April the 22nd, when we will be joined by Phil Shelley, who chaired last year's Hospital Food Review, and we'll be talking about the next steps for NHS caterers. And we have coming up as well the names of the suppliers who support the Public Sector Catering 100 group, and without whom events such as today's webinar would not be possible. So we'll see you on April the 22nd. Goodbye.